Well, this year I have a lot of alpine hiking that I have planned and that I've done and I'm going to do. I just got out of the Wind River Range up in Wyoming. And then in just a couple weeks, I'm going to be up in the Indian Peaks area in Colorado and also in the Sangre de Cristos, all above Tree 9 in the alpine area. So I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about alpine hiking and the tips you should know. Stay tuned. Well, first of all, what is alpine level? As soon as you get above the trees, you know you're at alpine level. Now I'm here just outside of Colorado Springs, up in kind of in the foothills of the Pikes Peak area. And I'm at 11,900 feet right now, and I'm right at tree line. Now that's not the same everywhere. Well, alpine level can vary depending on where you're at. You could be at 10,500 feet in some places. On one side of the mountain, it might be a little bit lower or higher than the other side of the mountain. It just depends on where you're at. But right here, right now, 11,900 feet, I'm at tree line. Just getting into alpine level. Okay, tip number one is to study up. You really got to know what you're getting into, no matter what hike you're doing, but especially when you get to alpine level. If you're going to be on a trail that's pretty well maintained and you're not going to be climbing up any steep, areas, then I think you just need to be familiar with where you're going, how long it is, what the elevation's at, things like that. Now, if you're going off trail, like right now I'm off trail, I had to do a little bit of study to figure out what I was going to get into. Take a look at maps. Take a look at topographical maps, especially because they will give you the topographical lines. That's the elevation lines. Once those lines get really close together, that means it's going to be pretty steep. In fact, it might be a cliff. So especially if you're going off trail, you want to know what you're getting into. There's even some trails that are established trails that are pretty steep that may require some special equipment, and I'll get into that soon. But the point here is to study up. Now, one thing about alpine areas is they have route classifications. There's class 1 through 5 and a bunch of categories of 5. Let's talk about class 1. Class 1 is a well-established, pretty flat walking surface. You're not going to be climbing up anything. Class 1, pretty easy going. Class 2 gets a little bit steeper of an incline. You might be scrambling a little bit, rock hopping, scrambling, rock scrambling, and there may be times when you need to use your hands once in a while. Class 2, pretty rocky, not a very smooth trail. Now, class 3, that's a little steeper incline. In class 3, you're probably going to be using your hands pretty often, and you might have a place where you could fall a distance, which means you're going to have a moderate exposure. Exposure up here means a little bit of air between you and the next landing surface. Exposure means, you're looking out over danger of falling. Class 4 gets very steep, and you're going to be dealing with quite a bit of exposure. You might even have ropes with you to get over some rough areas. You're going to be using your hands probably all the time, probably at least 3 points on every step. Class 4. Now, class 5, I'm not going to talk much about that because that gets into rock climbing skills. You're going to be bringing ropes and all kinds of equipment when you're doing class 5 climbs. So those are for rock climbers. Not anything I've ever gotten into. If you get into class 5, you're probably getting into an area where you're going to need some training and you're going to need some experience. Now, there's a link down below that explains a little bit more about these classifications, but in your research, in your studies, go ahead and get familiar with what route classification you're going to be getting into on your hike. Another thing you're going to need to be familiar with when you're in the alpine area is that the weather is going to be different than what it is down at lower elevations. Might be obvious, but the temperature is going to be cooler. Now, when I left my house this morning at 6,000 feet, it was around 65 degrees. When I got to the trailhead this morning at 10,000 feet, it was 40 degrees. Today, it's going to be about 90 degrees down there, and up here, it's going to be maybe in the 50s. Now, if you're going to be staying up here later in the day and maybe even sleeping up here, camping up in the alpine area, just know that it gets much cooler. The temperature variations swing pretty low down here For instance, tonight, up in this area, it's going to be around in the lower 30s, maybe mid 30s. It's also windier up here. The reason why I came up here in the morning is because it's less windy in the morning. The later in the day you get, typically, the windier it gets. And I don't expect the wind to be less than 20 miles an hour, especially when I get over this little saddle right here. It's going to get windy. That's why I'm filming right here, because it'll just be too windy to talk into the camera up there. So obviously in those kind of conditions, you want to be prepared with the right kind of clothing. So you might want to bring a couple layers, depending on what season it is. And you'll want to bring a windbreaker, something to keep the cold of the wind off of you. If you bring something that's really breathable, the wind's going to just go right through it, and it's not going to keep you warm. So bring a windbreaker kind of jacket. You might want to also bring a hat, or a hat that pulls over your ears, preferably, and especially when it gets a little bit later in the season. And I typically bring some gloves up here no matter what time of year it is, because my hands get pretty chilly. And you know, just because it's summer doesn't mean that it's not going to be chilly up here enough to bring like a couple layers. So just be prepared that you need to bring clothes to keep you a little bit warmer up here. And like with most kind of hikes you do, you should be prepared to stay overnight in case of an emergency. So that's another reason to bring more layers with you. Whether you use them or not, you might need them in case of emergency, or to help someone else who might not have brought any clothes with them to keep them warm enough up here. The next thing to think about when you're up here is that, especially in the monsoonal seasons, the weather up here can change quickly and for the worse. Summertime in the Rockies, when we have monsoonal patterns up here, you want to be off the high peaks out of the alpine area before noon. That's the typical rule. Now as you get later in the season, like September-ish, sometime around there, the monsoonal patterns start to dissipate, and you might be able to stay up here a little bit longer. But watch the weather. There's some good websites out there that give you mountain forecasts, and I'll have the link down below. And you can just type in the peak or the area that you're going to, and it'll give you the weather at elevation. So that's real handy. I've been up here where we started off beautiful sunny days, and then in the afternoon we had clouds build, we had thunderstorms, we had lightning, we had graupel and hail. It can get really nasty up here. So just be aware and be prepared and plan ahead. The next tip I want to talk about is oxygen levels are much lower up here than what they are at sea level. And you'll feel it. The air will be thinner, you'll be breathing heavier, you'll feel like you're more fatigued, more exerted. That's because the oxygen levels are lower and your body's craving that oxygen and trying to compensate for it. Let me give you some examples of the different oxygen levels and how they change. In Colorado Springs, which is about 6,000 feet, it's 20%, 21% less oxygen than at sea level. Now the elevation I'm at here now, almost 12,000 feet, is about 36% less than at sea level. When you're up at 14,000 feet at Pikes Peak behind me here, it's about 42% maybe, something like that, lower than what it is at sea level. So that's pretty significant. So when you're up here, less oxygen, just slow down a little bit. Focus on your breathing. Make sure you're breathing well enough. Breathe deep. Just take your time. Take as many breaks as you need. If you're feeling yourself getting a little dizzy, you know what? You're probably lacking a little oxygen. So slow down. Take a break. Get used to it. And speaking of not feeling well, my next point talks about altitude sickness. So check this out. So you want to understand a little bit about what's called mountain sickness or altitude sickness, or it's called several different things. Here's some clinical terms. Acute mountain sickness, AMS. High altitude cerebral edema. You'll hear it called HACE. And also high altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE. So I'm not going to go into each one of those terms, and because I know I'm not a medical professional, but let's just sum all that up into mountain sickness, because when you're up here, you really don't care about the diagnosis. You just care about how you're feeling and how you can prevent it and how you can feel better. Some of the symptoms, I wrote them all down here. Let me just read them off to you. It's a headache, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, dizziness, insomnia, cough. You might be confused. Now there are a few contributing factors to this mountain sickness. It's the elevation you're at. That's one of them. It's the length of exposure you have to this elevation, and then it's also the rate of ascent to this elevation. Get a little chilly. I had to put my jacket on. Okay, there's a couple things you can do to prevent mountain sickness. One of them is to control the rate of your ascent. Sometimes you will hear that referred to as acclimatization. Right, so you want to spend a day or two at this elevation. Some experts will tell you it's sleep at a higher elevation, so that'll extend your time at an elevation. The second thing is to hydrate well before you get started. Even the day before, start hydrating. Like last night, yesterday, I drank a lot more water and a lot more liquids than I normally do because I knew that I was coming up here. And one of the reasons is, well, first of all, you need to be hydrated well, but secondly, dehydration mimics a lot of the symptoms of mountain sickness. So you want to eliminate dehydration as what's causing the sickness that you might be feeling. Now you should know that about half the people that come to elevation from lower elevations will experience some sort of symptoms of elevation sickness. So it is pretty common. Sometimes it can get very severe, other times not. But just be aware that it's pretty common. And the people that have had a history of AMS have a greater chance of getting it again if they come back to elevation. Now I got a link down below that talks a lot about this, a lot more medical terms if you want to study up on that and get familiar with what it is and what the symptoms are and read a little bit more in detail. Go check it out. Sun intensity. The sun up here gets a lot more intense. Now you might know that the atmosphere helps filter out the UV. The higher you go, the less atmosphere is between you and the sun. Now, because we're millions of miles away from the sun, you're thinking it's not a big deal. But the fact is that for every 1,000 feet, your UV intensity increases by 4%. So if you're at sea level and you come to Colorado, the UV up here on average is going to be about 20% higher than what it is over at sea level. Now when you get up to a peak that's like 14,000 feet, it's about 40% higher than what it is at elevation. So be aware that UV is more intense up here. So what do you have to do? Well, I cover up my skin as much as I can. I'll have a hoodie on, I'll have a hat on, I'll make sure I have long sleeves on. I'll even cover up my hands with these gloves, and I'll put some sunscreen on my face and on my ears and anything that just might be exposed to the sun. So just take care of your skin, take care of yourself up here in this high intensity UV area. Okay, the last thing worth mentioning is gear. You might have to have different gear while you're up here. Now it just depends on the conditions you're going in. If you're going to be up here where there's some snow, you maybe want some traction, some micro spikes or maybe some crampons, and that'll help you get through some of the snow fields. You might also wear sunglasses, not only for the UV protection, but also the reflection off of the snow can get really intense and can cause snow blindness. If you're going to be glissading down these snow fields, you want to bring a self-arrest equipment, which is an ice axe, and you want to know how to use it. So take a course on how to use an ice axe and how to self-arrest, and just be familiar with your equipment. So if you're going to be an area that's especially class 3 and class 4, you're going to want to bring a rock helmet, because rocks from above will fall. If there's someone up there kicking up rocks, that's one thing. Naturally, sometimes rocks just fall. So bring a helmet to protect your head. Head injuries are real up here. I've known some people that have been hit by rocks, and serious. Be careful, take the right equipment. Now all of that is in addition to all the other gear that you're going to want to bring anytime you go hiking, right? The 10 essentials. Okay, so I'm David on Earth. This is my YouTube channel. Thanks for checking it out. If you've not subscribed before and you want to see more stuff about hiking and backpacking and all things about nature and gear reviews, you come to the right place. Go ahead and press that subscribe button and come back again. If you like this video, go ahead and press the like button. Send it to your friends. Mostly, I like conversation. I like comments. So go ahead and put your comments down below about your experience at alpine level. Love to hear it. All right. I will see you on the trail.